So, who poisoned the victims in the Tylenol murders? The short answer, the one that frustrates everyone, is that we still don't know. The killer was never caught. The case is still open. But it's not a story without suspects. There's one man who investigators have circled for decades. His name is James Lewis. But proving he did it is a whole other story. To really understand why this crime is so haunting, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to a normal fall day in 1982 in the suburbs of Chicago. It started on a Wednesday morning, September 29th. A 12-year-old girl named Mary Kellerman woke up with a sore throat and a runny nose. Just a common cold. Her parents gave her one extra-strength Tylenol capsule to make her feel better. A few minutes later, Mary collapsed on the bathroom floor. She was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. She was gone. The doctors were baffled. She was a healthy kid. They thought maybe she had a stroke or brain aneurysm. Something sudden and tragic, but natural. Nobody suspected the Tylenol. Why would they? That same day, a man named Adam Janis, a postal worker in another suburb, also felt sick. He stayed home from work. He bought a bottle of Tylenol on his way home. He took a capsule. A short time later, he collapsed and died. His family gathered at his house, shocked and grieving. His younger brother Stanley and Stanley's wife Teresa came to console Adam's family. They were distraught. They both had headaches from the stress and the crying. So they did what millions of people would do. They went to the medicine cabinet, found the same bottle of Tylenol that Adam had just used, and took some. Within minutes, Stanley collapsed. Then Teresa. Both died. 3 people from one family dead in one day. The paramedics and police at the scene were stunned. They thought maybe there was a gas leak in the house, or some kind of fast-acting poison. They sealed the house and started looking for answers. But the cause wasn't in the house. It was in that little red and white bottle. The connection wasn't made by the police at first. It was made by 2 off-duty firefighters who were listening to the scanner traffic. One mentioned the Kellerman girl's sudden death. The other mentioned the Janis family tragedy. They talked. They realized both strange deaths involved Tylenol. At the same time, a nurse at the hospital, Helen Jensen, was talking to the deputy medical examiner. She recalled the Janis deaths and connected them to the Kellerman girl. She had a gut feeling. She called the medical examiner's office. She said, "I think you need to check the Tylenol." That phone call changed everything. Investigators collected the Tylenol bottle from the Janis house and the one from the Kellerman house. They sent them to the lab. The results came back and they were terrifying. The capsules weren't filled with acetaminophen, they were filled with potassium cyanide. Enough in a single capsule to kill a person 100 times over. The news broke. The panic spread across Chicago like a fire. Tylenol was one of the most trusted brand names in America. It was in medicine cabinets everywhere. Now it was a potential weapon. The mayor of Chicago went on television and issued a citywide warning. Police cars drove through neighborhoods using their loudspeakers to tell people not to take Tylenol. Throw it away. Do not use Tylenol, they blared. Then more victims surfaced. Mary Reiner, a new mother, died after taking Tylenol. Paula Prince, a flight attendant, was found dead in her apartment. An open bottle of Tylenol was on her counter. Mary McFarland, another victim, collapsed at work. 7 people were dead. The city was in a state of terror. People went through their medicine cabinets throwing out bottles. These hospitals were flooded with calls from people who thought they might have been poisoned. The company that made Tylenol, Johnson & Johnson, faced a nightmare. Their flagship product was now associated with death and fear. Their stock price plummeted. Many business experts predicted the brand was finished. But the company's CEO, James Burke, made a decision that is still studied in business schools today. He didn't try to downplay it. He didn't try to manage the PR. He faced it head on. Johnson & Johnson immediately pulled all Tylenol from the shelves, not just in Chicago, but across the entire country. They recalled 31 million bottles. It cost the company over $100 million, a massive sum back then. They offered to replace every single bottle with a new, safe product for free. They were open and honest with the public. They put consumer safety above profits. And it worked. By taking such a drastic, responsible step, they eventually regained public trust. But while the public panic was being managed, the police had a massive investigation on their hands. How did this happen? They quickly figured out the poisonings weren't a problem at the factory. The victims had bought bottles from different stores, and those bottles came from different factories. The tampering had to have happened after the bottles were already on the shelves. The killer's method was chillingly simple. They would go into a store, take a bottle of Tylenol off the shelf, take it to a bathroom, or maybe their car. They would carefully pull apart the capsules, dump out the medicine, and replace it with cyanide powder. Then they'd put the capsules back together and place the bottle back on the shelf of that store, or maybe another one. They just had to wait for an unlucky person to buy it. It was random. It was anonymous. It was terrifyingly easy. The police had very little to go on. There were no fingerprints, no witnesses. The cyanide was a common industrial chemical. The killer could be anyone. They looked into disgruntled employees at Johnson & Johnson, but that led nowhere. They investigated people with a chemistry background. They chased down hundreds of dead-end leads. The whole country was watching, the pressure was immense, and then they got a break. Or what looked like a break. A letter arrived at the headquarters of Johnson & Johnson. It was an extortion letter. The writer demanded $1 million to stop the killing. It was a taunting, arrogant letter. The police now had their first real lead. They had a motive: money. They traced the letter. The postmark was from New York City. The investigation shifted its focus. They learned the letter was written by a man named James Lewis, but he was using a fake name. The police launched a nationwide manhunt. They released a sketch of a man who had been seen at a library, looking at books that matched phrasing in the extortion letter. The search led them to Kansas City, where they found that Lewis had worked for a tax company. They also found that his wife, Leanne, had worked there too, and her former boss had died of cyanide poisoning years earlier, though it had been ruled a suicide at the time. The connections were piling up. The Lewises were found in New York City after a librarian recognized James from the police sketch. They were arrested. The media frenzy was intense. Everyone thought, this is him. They got the Tylenol killer. But the case against James Lewis was complicated. He admitted to writing the extortion letter. He said he wanted to embarrass his wife's former employer. He saw the Tylenol crisis as an opportunity to make some money and cause some trouble. He was a strange man. He was a known con artist, a man who had used dozens of aliases. He had a history of bizarre crimes, including being a suspect in a grisly dismemberment case in Kansas City, though he was never charged with that murder. Lewis gave the police detailed drawings of how he imagined the killer might have operated. He seemed to enjoy the attention. He toyed with them, but he always denied being the killer. He said he was just an opportunist, and the police couldn't prove he was anything more. There was no physical evidence linking him to the poisonings in Chicago. His fingerprints weren't on any of the bottles. He and his wife had an alibi for the time of the poisonings. They were in New York. The police tried to break their alibi, but they couldn't. They couldn't place James Lewis in Chicago when the bottles were being tampered with. So what they could do was prosecute him for the extortion letter. He was convicted of extortion and sentenced to 20 years in prison. He served 13 years and was released on parole in 1995. For the FBI and the Chicago police, James Lewis remained the #1 suspect. They never stopped believing he was involved. They thought his alibi was weak. They thought his wife was covering for him. His personality matched the profile of someone who would commit such a cold, detached crime. The extortion letter seemed like a classic move from a killer trying to misdirect the police, or maybe just gloat. But belief isn't evidence, and they never found the evidence they needed to charge him with murder. Over the years, other names came up. There was Roger Arnold, a dock worker who had a grudge against a man whose daughter-in-law was one of the victims. He had chemistry books at his house and made some suspicious comments. The police looked at him hard, but he had an alibi, and they eventually cleared him. The pressure of being a suspect ruined his life. He had a breakdown and, tragically, ended up shooting and killing an innocent man he mistakenly thought was a bar owner who had reported him to the police. It was a sad and destructive side story to the main case. Another suspect emerged decades later. After the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski was arrested in 1996, investigators looked at him for the Tylenol murders. The timing fit. The first Unabomber attacks happened before 1982, and the Tylenol poisonings happened during a break in his bombing campaign. He grew up in a Chicago suburb. His family even said they suspected he might have been involved. And Kaczynski's goal was to create terror and disrupt society, which fit the Tylenol crime. The FBI investigated the link, but they found no direct evidence. Kaczynski's methods were different. He built intricate bombs. The Tylenol poisonings were crude by comparison. And when he was caught, Kaczynski took credit for his bombings, but he never said a word about Tylenol. The lead went cold, so the investigation always came back to James Lewis. In 2009, the FBI reopened the case with new forensic technologies. They raided Lewis's home in Cambridge, Massachusetts. They seized his computers and boxes of his belongings. They took DNA samples from him and his wife. They were hoping that modern science could find a trace of evidence on the old Tylenol bottles or the packaging that would finally link him to the crime. There was a flurry of media attention. It seemed like a breakthrough was imminent. But nothing came of it. No new charges were filed. The DNA tests apparently didn't provide the smoking gun they were looking for. James Lewis continued to live his life, always under the shadow of the murders. He gave interviews over the years, sometimes seeming to enjoy the notoriety, other times protesting his innocence and claiming he was a scapegoat. He always maintained that the extortion letter was just a stupid, greedy mistake. He passed away in 2023. If he was the killer, he took the secret to his grave. This leaves us with the big unanswered question. If it wasn't Lewis, then who was it? It's possible it was someone who was never even on the police's radar. Someone who committed the perfect crime and then just stopped. A person who simply wanted to watch the world burn. The randomness of the act is what made it so terrifying. The victims were not connected. They were just ordinary people doing an ordinary thing, taking a pill for a headache. The legacy of the Tylenol murders, however, is very clear. It's something you see every single day, and you probably don't even think about it. Before 1982, a bottle of pills had a simple screw-off cap, maybe with a little cotton ball inside. That was it. It was incredibly easy to open a bottle, tamper with the contents, and put it back without anyone knowing. After the poisonings, that all changed. Johnson & Johnson led the way. They didn't just bring back Tylenol, they brought it back in a whole new kind of packaging. First, they introduced the triple-sealed container. There was a glued box, then a plastic wrap around the neck of the bottle, and under the cap, a foil seal that you had to puncture to get to the pills. This was the birth of tamper-evident packaging. The idea was not to make the bottle tamper-proof. A determined person could still get into it. The idea was to make it tamper-evident. If the box was crushed, if the plastic seal was broken, if the foil was punctured, you would know. The consumer became the last line of defense. Soon, this kind of packaging became the industry standard not just for medicine, but for food, drinks, and all kinds of products. That foil seal on your yogurt, the plastic ring on your milk jug, the pop top on a jar of pickles, all of that is a direct result of the Tylenol murders. The crime also led to new laws. Product tampering was made a federal crime. The government and corporations had to completely rethink how they protected consumers from this kind of attack. The crime didn't just take 7 lives, it stole a little bit of innocence from everyone. It introduced a new kind of fear into everyday life, a fear that something as simple and trusted as a bottle of medicine could be turned into a weapon. The investigation continues, at least on paper. Every few years, a new detective gets assigned the cold case files. New technology gets developed, and there's a flicker of hope that maybe this time they'll find something. Maybe a fingerprint fragment can be enhanced, maybe a new DNA technique can pull a profile from a microscopic trace of saliva on a capsule. The families of the victims still wait for an answer. They've lived for over 40 years not knowing who killed their loved ones, or why. So, who was the Tylenol killer? The most likely answer remains James Lewis. He had the right kind of personality, a smart, manipulative man with a cruel streak and a desire for attention. His extortion letter put him right at the center of the crime. The circumstantial evidence against him is strong, but it's not definitive. There's always that sliver of doubt. The alibi that was never fully broken. The lack of any hard, physical proof. Could it have been someone else? Absolutely. It could have been a disgruntled chemist, a medical student, or just a sociopath who got a thrill from causing chaos and then faded back into a normal life. Someone who might have lived in the Chicago area for a short time and then moved away. Someone who never made a mistake, never told a soul, and never got caught. The story of the Tylenol murders is a chilling reminder of how fragile our systems of trust are. We trust that the food we buy is safe. We trust that the medicine we take is what it says it is. In 1982, someone broke that trust in the most horrific way. They used a symbol of healing as a delivery system for poison. And that person, whoever they were, got away with it. They watched the panic they created. They saw the news reports. They watched a multinational corporation almost crumble. They saw the entire country change its habits. And they were never held responsible. That's the most unsettling part of the whole story. The case isn't just cold, it's a ghost. A permanent, unsolved mystery that changed the way we live, hidden in plain sight on every shelf of every store. The real identity of the killer remains a blank space, a void at the heart of one of America's most infamous crimes. We know what happened, we know how it changed the world, but we still don't know who did it, and we may never know.